I want you to just picture a scenario for a second. A scene that, plays out in airports all over the world, probably every single day. You have someone who has spent years, maybe decades, living in a completely different culture. They've navigated complex language barriers. They've engaged in intense spiritual warfare. Maybe they've even dodged physical danger.
They've been running at full capacity, spiritually and emotionally.
Exactly. And then the assignment ends.
Yeah.
It's time to go home. So they pack away the uniforms, they file the final reports, they hug everyone goodbye in that, wrenching way. They get on a plane, they land.
In silence, the drop-off.
The church welcomes them back,
Yeah.
sure. There's a banner in the lobby, maybe a potluck. But then they put their suitcase in the attic, and that massive high-stakes sense of calling just quietly collides with everyday life. Grocery shopping, traffic, choosing a cereal brand.
Yeah.
The source material we're looking at today calls this the quiet crisis of return.
It really is a crisis, and quiet is the perfect word for it because it often happens without anyone noticing. It's not loud like a moral failure or a funding crash. It looks like normalcy.
Right.
The church breathes this collective sigh of relief, thinking, oh, good, they made it back safe. They've done their part. Now they can rest. And listen, rest is biblical. It's absolutely necessary.
Of course.
But the sources we're looking at today argue that we often mistake rest for retirement. We treat the return like it's the end of the story.
Right, like crossing the finish line of a marathon.
Yeah.
You stop running, you grab a banana, maybe a foil blanket, and you just go home.
Yeah, you're done.
But the sources we're diving into today argue that this mindset is actually a massive missed opportunity. They argue that a returning missionary isn't finished. They are, and this is a quote, a living, breathing reservoir of insight.
Wow.
And when we just let them fade into the background, the organization and the church at large suffers from something called generational amnesia.
That phrase, generational amnesia, is haunting. It implies that we are actively, forgetting what we've learned. The mission of this deep dive is to explore how we stop that loss.
Okay.
We're looking at alumni networks, but not in the way you usually think of them. This isn't about a newsletter or a college reunion where you just swap old war stories.
No, this is much bigger. The source material frames these networks as kingdom infrastructure. They're designed to stop the loss of hard-earned wisdom.
Precisely. Kingdom infrastructure.
So the hook here, the thing we really need to wrap our heads around to understand this deep dive, is shifting our perspective on the timeline. We need to stop looking at a missionary's return as a finish line and start seeing it as a sending line.
Exactly. And to do that, we have to unpack the theology of return. We have to reframe what homecoming actually means. Because if you look at the Bible, and the sources provide a really robust theological breakdown here, mission is rarely a straight line and then a full stop. It's a cycle. It's sending, then returning, then multiplying.
Okay, let's unpack this cycle. Because I think most of us, myself included, tend to see the sending part as the mission. The going is the work. The return is just the commute home.
Right. But look at the biblical precedents. The source points to Moses. Think about the geography of Sinai. Moses goes up the mountain. That's the going. He has this intense encounter with God, receives the law, fire and smoke. It's the peak spiritual experience.
Yeah.
But he doesn't. He doesn't stay on the mountain.
If he stayed up there, he'd have a great personal experience, but the people at the bottom of the mountain would be, well, completely lost.
Exactly. They'd be worshiping a golden calf. The mission wasn't just going up, it was coming down. His return is what allows him to instruct the people. His return is the delivery system for the revelation. If the return doesn't happen, the mission on the mountain is wasted.
That's a really strong point. The return is the delivery system.
Or look at Paul. We focus so much on his missionary journeys, right? The maps with the arrows going out. But his returns were just as critical. He came back to Antioch. He came back to Jerusalem to report to the council.
Yeah.
And eventually, even when he was confined in prison, which is a forced kind of return or stopping point, that's when he wrote the letters that formed the theological backbone of the church.
So his return phase, or his stationary phase, resulted in the training and doctrine we still use today.
It did. If Paul had just kept hiking and preaching without stopping to synthesize and teach the next generation people like Timothy and Titus, the movement might have just fizzled out after one generation.
And even Jesus.
Yeah.
The source points out that Jesus' return from the wilderness wasn't the end of his work. It was the start of his public ministry.
It's this concept of redeployment. That's the term the material uses, and I think it's vital. Return isn't regression. You aren't going backward. You are being redeployed.
We deployed.
The geography changes. You might not be in the jungle or the desert anymore, but the calling matures. You shift from being the pioneer on the front lines to being the steward or the guide for the next generation.
I like that shift, pioneer to guide. But let's be honest, that transition it's messy. It's not just a job title change on LinkedIn. The source talks about liminal space. Can you explain that? Because that sounds a bit academic, but the description was very visceral.
It is. Liminal space is a threshold. It's that waiting room between what was and what will be. For a returning missionary, it's a sacred season, but it's often very, very disorienting.
Right.
You physically left one world, but you haven't fully emotionally arrived in the next. You don't fit in your old country anymore, but you aren't in your host country either.
It feels like limbo.
It feels like nothingness. But the source argues this is fertile ground. It's not just a logistical move of shipping boxes. It's a time for deep reflection. If we rush people through this, or if we ignore it and just tell them to get a normal job and be normal, we waste the transformation that's happening in that space.
And if we waste it, we hit that danger zone we mentioned earlier, generational amnesia. There's a specific scripture the source brings up that serves as a pretty stark warning. Judges 2.10.
Yes. This verse, it just stops you cold. After that whole generation had been gathered to their ancestors, another generation grew up who knew neither the Lord nor what he had done.
That is heavy.
Yeah.
It sounds like a total system failure.
It is the ultimate failure of stewardship. It's a horror story for missiology. And notice, it's not that God stopped working. It's not that the truth stopped being true. It's that the memory of his work wasn't transmitted. The link broke.
The cost of silence is just incredibly high.
It is. When experience isn't transmitted, the next generation is forced to relearn lessons the hard way. They repeat cultural mistakes. They burn out because they don't have the roadmap that the previous generation already drew. They are starting from scratch every single time.
So what exactly are we losing? The source lists a few specific types of lost capital. I think it's worth digging into these because it helps us value what these returnees are carrying in their, invisible suitcases.
Well, the first is tested theology. You can learn theology in a classroom, and that's valuable. But theology that has been refined under the pressure of persecution or extreme poverty or spiritual warfare, that is different. That is weightier.
It's the difference between reading about an anchor and actually using one in a storm.
Exactly. If that deep tested knowledge doesn't get passed down to the 22-year-old just starting out, the whole church becomes shallower. Then there's cultural intelligence, the nuance that textbooks just can't teach.
You mean like how to read a room in a specific culture, how to navigate honor and shame?
Yes, or like knowing that in some cultures, a polite yes actually means no, and if you don't know that, you ruin the relationship.
Right.
That intuition takes decades to build. Why would we let that evaporate? And finally, the source mentions hard-earned humility. This is wisdom born from failure.
That last one really resonates with me. We usually want to share our highlight reels.
Yeah.
The newsletter's always, look at the thousands we baptized. But you're saying the network needs to capture the failures too?
Absolutely. Perhaps even more so. The source talks about the missionary as a wounded healer. Many return with moral injury or unprocessed grief. They've seen things, experienced losses, maybe felt betrayed by their own team.
So the alumni network isn't just a victory lap.
Far from it. If the vibe is just heroes welcome, the person who is hurting will hide. The network needs to provide a safe space for lament. The source cites David and Hannah, people who poured out their anguish. If a returning missionary can process these wounds in a community that understands, they don't just get healed, they become healers.
How does that work?
Their scars serve as credentials. When a young missionary is struggling, a mentor who can say, I have that same scar, I felt that same betrayal, and here's how God met me, carries an authority that a textbook never will.
That is powerful. It takes the return from being a sad ending to being a new beginning of ministry. So let's get practical. We know the theology, we know the danger of ignoring it. How do we fix it? What is the actual solution here?
The solution proposed is a structured alumni network. But again, we have to clarify, this is more than a social club. It's not just about nostalgia. It's a theological intervention.
Okay, intervention implies we are stepping in to stop a negative trajectory. What are the core functions of this network?
The first and most critical function is mentorship, specifically following the Paul and Timothy model. The source encourages us to analyze 2 Timothy 2.2. It calls this verse the DNA of alumni
I
networks.
have that verse here. And the things you have heard me say in the presence of many witnesses, entrust to reliable people who will also be qualified to teach others.
Exactly. Look closely at that. You have 4 generations in one sentence. Paul, who teaches Timothy, Timothy, who teaches faithful men, and faithful men who teach others. It's a multiplication chain. The alumni network exists to facilitate this chain.
And here's where it gets really interesting for me. The source mentions mutual sanctification. We usually think mentorship is charity. The old person gives to the young person.
And the young person benefits, right?
Yeah, and the old person just gets tired. But the source says it helps the mentor too.
It does. I mean, think about it. When you have to articulate your experience, when you have to explain why you did what you did, it clarifies your own theology. It renews your sense of calling. Instead of feeling like a has-been, the mentor realizes their experience is alive. It's doing work right now in the life of this younger person. It heals that sense of uselessness that often plagues returning missionaries.
That's a huge win-win. What's the second function?
Memory is ministry. This connects back to Deuteronomy 6. Memory isn't just fond recollection, it's a spiritual discipline. We have a duty to document lessons.
So writing things down,
Yeah.
recording, well, deep dives like this,
Yeah.
creating archives.
Yes, oral and written testimony. The goal is to convert personal memory, which dies with you, into communal inheritance, which lives on.
Huh.
If a missionary figured out a breakthrough way to engage a specific unreached people group and they never write it down or teach it, that breakthrough dies when they retire. That's a tragedy. The network provides the platform to archive and distribute that wisdom.
It's like building a library of lived obedience.
Beautifully put, a library of lived obedience. And the third function is strategic connection or lateral influence. Returning missionaries act as living bridges
Bridges between who?
between the local church and the field. Often local congregations want to help, but they don't really understand the reality on the ground. They send winter coats to the tropics or they pray for things that aren't the real issue. The alumnus knows both worlds. They can translate global realities for local members.
So they become the intelligence officer, in a way.
Exactly. They connect resources, money, prayer, people to the specific needs they know are real. They mobilize prayer with insight, not just generalities. They make the church's engagement smarter.
So they become the connector. That makes so much sense. Okay, so we have mentorship, memory, and connection. Now let's talk mechanics. If I'm a church leader or a mission agency director listening to this, how do I actually build this? Do I just put everyone in a room and hope for the best?
Definitely not. The source emphasizes intentional pairing. Mentorship shouldn't be random, and it shouldn't just be based on who is the most famous.
Right, compatibility over prestige. Just because someone wrote a bestseller about missions doesn't mean they are the right mentor for a specific young person.
Exactly. You need to match based on season of life, personality, specific context. If a young family is heading to a high-security zone in the Middle East, pairing them with someone who served in a radically different context, say, open relief work in Latin America, might offer general spiritual support, but it misses the specific tested wisdom they need for that environment.
You want a match where the scars of the mentor speak to the fears of the mentee.
That's the goal. And it requires structure. You can't just say, go have coffee sometime. It requires defining rhythms, regular prayer, debriefing, storytelling sessions. It needs to be on the calendar.
Okay.
And interestingly, the source suggests an assessment.
An assessment, like a test. That sounds a bit corporate for a ministry network.
It's more like a readiness check. Both the mentor and mentee need to be ready. For the mentor, are they spiritually mature enough to be vulnerable? Are they emotionally available? Or are they still drowning in their own transition?
Right. Hurt people hurt people.
Exactly. You don't want a bitter mentor poisoning a new missionary, and you don't want an arrogant mentee ignoring wise counsel, so you have to assess that readiness.
And finally, the source mentions flexibility in the model.
Yes. You can have local groups, which allow for deep face-to-face relational bonding, sharing meals, crying together. Or you can have digital groups, which allow for scalability. Maybe the only person who understands your specific field context lives 3 states away. A digital network allows that connection to happen. Hybrid models work best, combining both.
It seems like the overarching theme here is intentionality. We have to stop treating the return as an administrative checklist, turn in keys, sign papers, goodbye, and start treating it as a strategic redeployment.
That is the key shift. We are moving from viewing the missionary as a graduate, someone who is done, to a guide.
I love that image. You aren't graduating from the mission. You are graduating to a new role within the mission.
And this brings us back to that core belief that runs through all these documents. No obedience is ever wasted if it is shared.
If it is shared, that's the caveat.
Right. The suffering, the loneliness, the breakthroughs, the cultural mistakes, all of it becomes fuel for the next generation. If we build the infrastructure to transport it, the mission doesn't end. It continues through the returnee.
It's a challenge to the whole church, really, to value the gray hair, the limp, the worn-out Bible, to see those not as signs of obsolescence, but as signs of immense value.
It is. It's a call to stewardship.
Okay.
We steward money, we steward buildings. We need to steward the lived experience of God's people. That is the ultimate resource.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, we want to leave you with a provocative thought from the source material. It's a question for you to chew on, whether you're a returning missionary, a church leader, or just someone who cares about the kingdom.
The question is this: who is waiting for the wisdom I carry? How can my finish line today become someone else's starting point tomorrow?
That's it for this deep dive. Thanks for listening, and let's keep the conversation going.
Till next time.